Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We are going to be discussing advancing the vision, next steps for faith-based affordable housing. So we're going to be waiting just a moment as people start to join our webinar today. So I will go through this intro a couple of times, but just a few things to note before we start this conversation. You can see us, but we cannot see you. But you are an important part of our conversation. So I hope that you'll be participating and sharing your thoughts, ideas, and questions throughout our conversation for the next hour in the chat. We want to make sure that we get to as many audience questions as possible. So please feel free to go ahead and pop those questions into the chat. And now, since we have some people joining us, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from, either geographically or what organization you're with, that would help us get an idea of who all is in the chat today. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. Today, we are discussing advancing the vision, next steps for faith-based affordable housing initiatives. My name is Serena Unrein, and I'm with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, which is managed by LISC Phoenix. About once a quarter or so, we get together with practitioners from various sectors to share best practices, data, and policies to improve community health. Today, we are partnering with the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability, or ARCHES, to talk about the policy ideas that are needed to facilitate partnerships between faith communities and developers. While the Yes in God's Backyard bill failed in the Arizona legislature this spring, our panel will discuss both the lessons learned and momentum built this far, as well as other policy and political opportunities beyond this YIGBY legislation. So again, just to mention, you can see us, but we can't see you. But you are an important part of our conversation today. So we hope that you will both introduce yourself in the chat now and tell us who you are and where you're from, as well as share your thoughts and ideas throughout the conversation over the next hour. And please be sure to ask the panel any questions that you might have, and we'll get to as many audience questions as we can during the next hour. So without further ado, I'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves so you can get to know them a little bit better. And if you could each share your name, who you work for, and any helpful background that we should know about you, that would be great. I'll start with you, Steve.
Yeah, hi everyone. I recognize a few names popping up. It's nice to be with you. Steve Kapobris. I run an organization called Housing for Hope, which is really the housing development arm of Catholic Charities in the Phoenix Diocese here in Arizona. And again, I've been involved in affordable housing now going on 35 years. Used to work in state government and oversee the housing programs there. But I've also had a keen interest in how to get the church engaged on major issues, especially housing. And so when Catholic Charities asked me to join their organization 14 years ago, I thought it's a great opportunity to intersect the two issues. And so I've been working on a few church projects, which we'll talk about today. But since we've been doing housing for the last 12 years, we have about 850 units we've developed. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for being here, Steve. Bill, how about you introduce yourself next?
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Fulton. I am a professor of practice at UC San Diego in California, which has passed a YIGBY law, which I'll talk about. I'm also the co-director of the UCSD Center for Housing Policy and Design. I'm a land use planner by training. I used to be the director of planning and economic development for the city of San Diego. I've also done a lot of work in Texas on housing issues. And I recently started, like everyone else in the world, I recently started a Substack newsletter, which deals with cities and place and things like that, and the role of cities and place post-COVID, which is called The Future of Where.
Thanks, Bill. We'll be sure to drop a link to that in the chat and in the follow-up email as well. Hugh, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Hugh Martinez. I'm with GHK Properties based in Arizona. I myself am physically located in Los Angeles. I've developed about 2,000 units over the last 25 years, including 3 YIGBY projects in Los Angeles, 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in Garden Grove. We have a YIGBY project in Tucson that's 9% under construction, 64 units, another YIGBY project in Albuquerque, 60 units in pre-development, and another 66 units of YIGBY housing in Houston. So very excited about the opportunity, and I've been involved with the YIGBY movement since 2017 in California, and did advocacy work on getting SB4 passed. So I hope that the team doesn't get discouraged. It took us 7 years in deep blue California, so it's a little bit more of a challenge in purple Arizona, and hope that we can work to that and promote housing for all of our neighbors and constituents.
Thanks, Hugh. And last but not least on the panel, Kenny.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Kenny Wong. I'm a lecturer at the University of Arizona and also co-director for ARCHES, the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability. We're a center co-located across ASU, U of A, Northern Arizona University, and the University of New Mexico, and are interested in supporting housing research and development through research and partnerships, looking at policy and supporting all the good work around our state and region. I'm also a coordinator for the Housing Equity Lab of the Drockman Institute. And one of our marquee ARCHES products is the State of Housing in Arizona report, which we're working on this summer. So just wanted to throw that out there quickly.
Great. As you can see, we have a tremendous panel of experts with some great background and expertise, as well as some real life practical examples that we'll be getting to this afternoon or this morning. So I think where I'd like to start is just having each of the panelists talk about one or two of the most important considerations for faith-based organizations, developers, or government agencies to consider regarding faith communities and affordable housing development, just to give some context for this conversation. And Steve, I'm going to have you start as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important. And when I talk to churches, you kind of get a sense right away. Are they really driven to do this because they feel it's part of their mission, or they're just trying to make some money? And again, if you're going to do this to make some money, I don't want to talk to you. You really have to see this as part of your mission. And then the second thing is you really need to be sensitive to the history of the church in that neighborhood, and trying not to disrupt what has happened because they consider it a sacred property, but try to do things around the property that will enhance what they've been doing there for years. And as examples, Serena, if you want to pull up the St. Andrew's Church, but I want to give you an example of a project that we've been working on now for about 2 years. And this church is an Episcopal church. I was approached by the Episcopal Diocese to talk with this church about the possibility of developing housing, because the bishop wants to do this as a mission of the Episcopal Church. And so we met with a committee of the church for over 1.5 years to design something that would add to the church and not detract from the neighborhood. Had meetings with the vice mayor of Glendale. Some legislators got involved, were supporting our efforts. Had the lead pastor's full support, and we came up with a concept that added to the church, that they felt added to the church. Has some community facilities, kept some open space, which was very important to them. But along comes a new pastor, and the new pastor says, okay, time out. I don't know if we necessarily want to do this. I see an opportunity to rebuild and make this more of a thriving church again. And so this project was put on hold, and the bishop is allowing the new pastor to really come up on their own with the idea that, maybe we should do this or maybe we shouldn't. So it just shows you that you need to engage the people, but you really need that lead pastor support if a project is going to move forward. The second example is a property that I'm working on now with a Catholic church up in Sedona called St. John Vianney. And the concept here is trying to get a picture of their master plan for their entire campus. They actually have 14 acres up there, and they saw housing as a piece of this. And so we held a town hall. We've engaged the membership. They really are starting to see this as an extension of the mission. And so bottom line, I think it's really important that if you work with churches, they really need to get the mission standpoint, and we really need to try to design it to how the members of the body, not just the leadership of the church, really see it fitting into what they do there. So with that, I'll turn it back.
Thanks for sharing, and thanks for the visuals, Steve. Bill, what do you think are a couple of considerations?
Well, just by background, in 2023, California did adopt a YIGBY law. It's called SB 4 for Senate bill in California. It basically allows expedited approval of YIGBY projects. We're beginning to see YIGBY projects around the state. San Diego was a little bit the city of San Diego was a little bit out ahead, and we see some projects here, which I'm happy to talk about. It seems to me, faith-based institutions and real estate developers live in completely different worlds. I don't care whether it's a housing developer or what they call a market rate developer. Churches are mission driven. Affordable housing developers are often mission driven too, but that's a very tough business to be in, and it's very hard to get projects approved no matter where you are, and it's very hard to get them financed. And so I think critical to this situation is for the church or the other faith-based institution to have a relationship with a developer who they really trust and who they know can lead them through the processes, because churches are all different types of denominations have different decision-making processes. Churches are not businesses really, and yet real estate development in the end is about numbers and about making the numbers work. So I think that relationship is really important. And if you're a faith-based institution, I would say don't partner with just the first developer that comes along. Really make sure that it's a good fit for you.
Excellent points. Thank you. Hugh, what do you have to contribute?
Well, I'm piggybacking off a little bit of what Bill and Steve said in regards to the dynamics of the partnership. Based on what Bill said, the timing is really crucial. What we find is that sometimes we encounter churches that really are mission driven and really do want to do something good for the community. But they're also in a lurch because financially they're bleeding and they have maintenance costs that they can't sustain. And unfortunately, we've come into situations where, say, the property is a good property, but it may need a rezone or what have you. And with the timeline, there's really no way to work with the faith community in the timeline that they need. So there needs to be an understanding of the processes of the timing, where it's not like a market rate transaction that's going to close in 45 to 60 days for the faith community, because I think that's what they see when they buy their personal homes. The second thing I will say is that there's an opportunity to leverage relationships that the church has when it comes to opposition. The church oftentimes knows a lot of the community stakeholders and can really provide that conduit to create that neutral space to communicate with community members. And also they oftentimes have a deep bench of volunteers. So in our case, in Desert Dove, they were doing a food pantry offsite. So we decided to build them the walk-in freezer within the community room, so they could provide food distribution from the actual community as opposed to going to another church. And we also leveraged their job training program. The church folks were willing to volunteer to drive the residents to medical appointments or job interviews. So that's helped. And there's that opportunity where you should first look at the resources that the church has and not develop or design the project in a vacuum and really leverage that to enhance the community and combine that with the design to do something meaningful. And lastly, it's you have to be mindful of issues that will come up. So one of the things that may come up if you're ground leasing, as opposed to selling the land, is that you may have existing non-conforming conditions. So you may have, depending on which municipality you're dealing with, you may need a ADA ramp for the church, and that'll be triggered. And as a developer, you should anticipate that you're not going to hit the church for those upgrades, because chances are they won't have the money to do that. So be prepared and to plan for those sorts of events. Also, the other thing that we've seen is sometimes there are concerns with the insurance coverage over common areas. And it's like, look, they're not going to sue the church; they're going to sue us. We'll just write you an indemnity, because you'd have to be a very horrible person to sue a church for slip and fall or what have you.
Thanks, Hugh. I appreciate these points. And then Kenny, do you have anything else you'd like to add to?
Yeah, definitely. So as someone interested in the intersection of both planning and design, it's worth remembering, churches, faith-based organizations, they're embedded within the neighborhood fabric of our cities. And so they both know the areas that they're working within, have the advantages of constituents, but are also, that presents challenges and also opportunities, right? Where you may be introducing variety into the housing spectrum and the fabric of the neighborhood. And so that kind of warrants flexibility in zoning, different types and formats of housing. Allowing that to be possible is an important part of enabling this kind of development. And to also think very carefully about site design and the interface between uses, between the church properties or different institutions, and how you welcome in a very different use, welcome in community, perhaps take advantage of shared spaces as well, and open up kind of, again, into the neighborhood and allowing access to seeing how these uses can be compatible. So there's a lot that can be done with mixed use and co-location at these developments.
As you all can hear in the audience, we have a real wealth of insight here. So please, throughout this webinar, I hope you'll be asking your questions and sharing your insight and comments in the chat, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. I want to make sure that I mention before we go on too far that LISC Phoenix and the Arizona Community Foundation have a housing development training institute for people who are looking to create more affordable housing development in Arizona, and they'll be providing technical assistance to emerging developers and nonprofits. And if you're interested, I will put the chat in, or put the link to the survey in the chat. So if you are interested in the Housing Development Training Institute, you can fill that chat out or fill that survey out, and they'll be sure to get back to you. I wanted to get our first question over to Steve, because I think we all might want a little bit of background about what happened with the YIGBY legislation in Arizona this past session, really the past two legislative sessions, and what the coalition sees as the next steps for moving this forward.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to compliment the Valley Interfaith Project. I noticed there's a few individuals on here from them, and they've been helping to lead the charge, and I've been working with them on this important piece of legislation. But if you're not familiar with YIGBY here in Arizona, essentially what we are trying to do was give church property the right to do multifamily housing without going through the zoning circus of rezoning, because what we're finding most of the time is church property is in single family zone areas, and the time and energy and cost it takes to rezone essentially kills any forward momentum on affordable housing. And so whatever we can do to ease up that process is what we're trying to do with this bill. We're trying to learn from California, And as Hugh said, we know it took 7 times before it got passed, and it may take that here if we can get it going again. But essentially there were 3, I think, reasons why the bill failed this year. One is there's just an over-sensing fatigue, I think, with housing in general. If you look at the Arizona Housing Coalition website, they're monitoring over 70 bills right now, or this session. That's just a lot of legislation with a housing impact. And I think the members get a little overwhelmed. There's competition for bills. And, with the Department of Housing up for renewal, with the extension of the state housing tax credit, it just got caught up in a mess of legislation. It's hard to get focused on what we're trying to do with that bill. Secondly, there's a lot of anti-apartment sentiment. And I think a lot of this is being driven by some East Valley, Phoenix legislators who are caught up in the whole Axon debate that Scottsdale's having with multifamily housing. There's just a general multifamily anti-sentiment in Scottsdale that is carried over into the legislature. And we got caught up in that whole debate. I was on the stand and felt the wrath of an East Valley legislator, and I got it. The third thing is that there are some members that feel like churches shouldn't get special treatment. And there are some churches that feel like, we shouldn't be developing housing on churches because it is sacred property. And so you have to overcome those biases as well. And so taking all this into account, I think we will regroup, try to learn some lessons here, and realize that this may take a little bit of time. But I think the important thing, and I met with some members of the opposition after one of the hearings, and they told me, look, we don't oppose you, we don't oppose housing, but we want to make sure we have a voice. And these were some of the neighbors. And I get it. It's not like we're saying we're just going to do whatever and forget you. I think we have to show that we're sincere, that we are addressing neighborhood concerns and trying to add value to the neighborhood, to the community, and not detract from it. I think if we focus on that, we'll do a much better job in future years.
That's all helpful insight and good lessons learned. I don't know if anyone on the panel has anything to add to that, but okay, Kenny, go for it.
Yeah, just a preview of, some of the trends that we're seeing in Arizona, at least in our upcoming State of Housing report. Since the pandemic, the scale of multifamily housing, the permits had grown over time, but we are seeing a backslide to predominantly single family permitting in the latest year's data.
And I would say that obviously the context in California is different. You talk about being overwhelmed by housing bills. The state has passed more than 100 different housing bills since 2016, and there are dozens in the legislature each year. One thing I would note is that, as I indicated, San Diego got out ahead of the state YIGBY law in 2019 by essentially allowing YIGBY projects, multifamily YIGBY projects in church parking lots, no matter what zone they are located in. And actually, the first YIGBY project in San Diego, or one of the first, that is located in a parking lot owned by an African-American church in South San Diego, took advantage of the local option rather than the state option. And I recognize that when you get in a situation like Steve said, where the local politics are even less favorable probably than the state politics, that's not going to happen. But I would point out that within the context of state law, it may be possible for local jurisdictions to go to blaze their own path if their political support for that is there.
Really interesting points. And Bill, I'd like to stay on San Diego and just hear a little bit more about the YIGBY work happening in San Diego, because you all were really the kind of pioneers on this. So I don't know if you have some best practices that you think might be applicable to other communities, but please feel free to share what you've learned and maybe what we should be avoiding.
Well, first of all, the Turner Center at Berkeley, which I'm also associated with, concluded that after SB4 passed, that there was 47,000 acres of faith-based institution land in California that's theoretically eligible under SB4 for housing. Obviously, a lot, if not most, of that property has churches and other religious institutions already on it, and so you're not going to tear those down and build housing. Although a lot of it is used for parking, and I think the point is well taken that people worry about churches, a church or faith-based property being sacred property. On the other hand, is it you do park your cars on sacred property? What's a better use for sacred property? Building housing for people who need it, or parking your car? I indicated that San Diego was out ahead. The first project that I talked about before, it's on a 50 by 100 foot lot. It's 25 units for disabled veterans, studio apartments. I think the lesson that I learned, the regulatory barriers have largely gone away in California for the reasons that we described. I think the tougher challenge is the financing. That project was built because a wealthy individual here in San Diego provided a line of credit at a bank for the church and the YIGBY and the associated developer to use. That was very generous of him. It all worked out fine financially. Wealthy people giving a line of credit for a YIGBY project is probably not scalable, right? And so, as with so many, I've seen this over and over again in other contexts, infill development, one-off types of development projects. You have to start with what I call quirky capital. You have to start with unconventional sources of financing, and I think one of the big challenges is how do you scale that, and how do you normalize all that? I would love to hear from the other panelists about how they do it.
Well, I was going to add,
please go ahead. Sorry.
Obviously many of us use government money because that's
right.
really the only game in town. Now, I've used every other source of capital out there, private, foundation, you name it, but you got to piece many layers to make these deals work. The one thing I appreciate about California, which we probably ought to look at here in Arizona, is the fact that cities just can't unilaterally kill a deal. The state, in the case of LIHTC, cannot award a credit unless the city signs off on it. And in one case, on a deal I had, it killed the deal. Now, I had to threaten legal action, and that got them to change their mind. But it's unfortunate we had to go that direction. But we need to be able to facilitate dialogue and not just unilaterally kill a deal. And so we should probably look at that here in Arizona. The second thing I was going to add that we could really use some help with is facilitating, connecting the pieces. I've been fortunate that Valley Interfaith has connected me to churches. Obviously, I have an in with the Catholic Diocese. I have another group that connected me to a Baptist church that we're working with. But there needs to be a better way to help link up interested parties to try to make these deals work. And I think they're doing that in some cities. I looked at Atlanta, San Antonio. They have these faith-based initiatives. They're connecting people, they're providing technical assistance, they're providing pre-development money. Those kinds of things certainly would work and help here.
Yeah, and going back to what Bill was saying about scalability, it's just a very different environment. It seems that that affordable housing in Arizona still doesn't attract private capital the way it does in California, where you have Apple and Facebook with their own fund through Capital Impact Partners, or how even the California Community Foundation provides lines of credits to emerging developers and smaller nonprofits, or even how the state seeded the Golden State Acquisition Fund. So essentially, you're getting up to, at one point it used to be 105% loan to value on land for 3 years at 6%. So that sort of financing, really helps. But of course, the context is different in that California has such a high population that that the tax increment can really pay for it. So But that also leads into, well, what can we do to have these private organizations that are stakeholders help out and possibly contribute to solving the issue of the housing crisis in Arizona?
Let's stay on that topic of financing for a moment. And if you all could, wave a magic wand and ask people in government or private philanthropy or the private sector to play a role in financing, what would that look like to you? And if there are other ideas for what Bill calls quirky capital, what kinds of things do you think we're missing here in Arizona that would be really beneficial?
Well, I think one of the big things is financing for non-LIHTC affordable projects, which is painful because you're really subsidizing more than what you would if without the credits, and if you had the credits. At the same time, it would allow you to do smaller scale projects that are too small to really make sense as a LIHTC deal, either as a 409. The other thing is maybe some workforce product, like some sort of mezz equity, and I know that NEF has a product like that they've been using in Texas, but they're only doing it for rehab, ACT rehab projects. So something like that mezz, where there's a rate of return that's lower than the market, but still makes sense for them. That would also help.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, no, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, LIHTC is what it is. It's a particular model. As Hugh said, you almost have to have a big project to do it. Plus, you have to wait a long time to lock down the LIHTC financing. To me, it seems like the future of a lot of this stuff lies elsewhere. And if I could wave a wand, I would wave a wand and say there needs to be a lot more housing impact, private or philanthropic housing impact funds, where the investors, be they foundations, be they private companies, be they individuals, are willing to get a relatively low return in exchange for investing. I know that Liskin Charlotte runs such a fund, and often does that collaboratively with the city's own bond money for affordable housing, and they're able, particularly on buying existing properties and locking down the affordability, they're able to move very, very fast, essentially in a matter of days. So as I say, LIHTC's really important. It has bipartisan support. It is what it is, but I think in the future, it won't be the only game in town and can't be.
I agree, Bill. I was going to mention we had an effort here in Arizona a few years back by the hospitals, by the major insurance companies to put a fund together, which eventually became Home Matters, thanks to the Vitalist Foundation for leading the charge. And I was asked to come in and address them. And I basically said, look, I would love to be able to give you a deal, and based on the rents, here's how I can afford to pay you back. Will you just fund it based upon the mechanics of the deal? And then, you know what they came back and said? Okay, 6%. Like, that's not going to work.
Right.
We need sources of capital that basically will look at the pro forma of a deal and say, okay, I will fund it to whatever you can pay. Those are the sources of capital that we need.
And my quick thought would be, just to fund our state and local housing trust funds, and to think creatively with local bonds, or, establishing, again, revolving loan funds to help stimulate the market in our local communities.
All really interesting ideas. And I know we have members in the audience here who are part of philanthropy and part of local government. So I hope that this is giving folks some ideas and some starting places to work from here. And speaking of the audience, if you have questions for our panel, please don't be shy. Please go ahead and feel free to pop those in the chat. We're sharing some links and ideas as well in the chat, and I hope that if you are having some thoughts or ideas that you want to share, that you will also be putting those into the chat. I want to shift away from financing for the moment and talk a little bit more about policy. Kenny, I'm going to be coming to you just to give you a heads up. I know you had talked about wanting to see how YIGBY can be used for innovative ideas, and I'd love to have you chat a little bit more about what some of those innovative ideas are that you see YIGBY could be used for.
So through the Drockman Institute within our college too, we've been engaged with folks that are interested in temporary uses of church properties, understanding that, a full development takes time. And so that's sort of a unique innovation of what could we do temporarily to meet the needs that are out there. And, there are constraints around the kinds of shelters or, what temporary uses might be there. And it's an opportunity to look at the time frame of development taking longer, and allowing some of these again just flexible uses within the zoning and the land use possibilities. So that it was a really interesting design studio where they were looking at how to construct a temporary shelter, dismantle it, relocate it if needed, as that property perhaps gets used for permanent housing. So really applauded that work from colleagues here.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, we're experiencing that here in California, and also with the fire recovery, where some of the churches have been utilizing mobile structures or temporary structures to keep people in the community until they rebuild.
That's great. Sorry, I'm checking out the questions in the that are coming from the audience as well. Hugh, I want to stick with you for a moment and get your perspective as a developer and really stay on this policy topic. Are there policy changes that you really need to see enacted that would help enable future development? And what have you seen that really helps these kinds of projects be successful?
I think it's really I think the parking requirement plays a big role in it, because the churches, depending on how active they are, may not really need as much parking. Of course, that also requires an honest conversation with the congregation as to whether they're planning for future growth and what they think that will look like. But I think parking is one of the biggest policy related issues in terms of the how YIGBY is defined in really driving down the costs and helping you to really make the project feasible. Of course, there are the other zoning and objective design issues, but I would defer to Bill and Kenny on that.
I would also say on the parking, I would say you also have to think about and be realistic about what the parking needs of the residents of the housing are going to be. In the project that I mentioned in South San Diego, it's 25 units for on a single family lot, essentially, for disabled veterans, 1 block from the light rail, from a light rail station. The parking needs of that population are probably not going to be great, and so getting away with less parking than would otherwise be the case for the population you're serving actually is appropriate in that case.
I was just going to bring up again, a lot of this comes back to the local municipality and how they're viewing design review and flexibility in design review. We have a situation with a Baptist church in South Phoenix. And Serena, if you want to throw up that last slide, where we were funded to develop 11 units of housing for formerly homeless seniors. And City of Phoenix is funding it. But we're running into a challenge with staff about the fact that we need to redevelop the street leading up to the property. It's a street that essentially is like an alley for all intents and purposes, but it is a street. And the way that the street department staff is reading this is we have to pay for the improvement in that street, which is essentially killing the deal. So we've been trying to get changes and getting nowhere with the lower level staff. So obviously you have to elevate it. And I recently had a meeting with 3 deputy city managers, planning director, the street department director of the city of Phoenix to get their attention to actually do something for me. And that's what it took to actually do something here, to create a design that actually would work for the neighborhood, but eliminate the need for me to develop a street for the city of Phoenix. This was kind of insane. If the staff were empowered to do this themselves without having to elevate it to a 3 deputy city managers, it would make our lives a lot simpler to actually do these projects.
Well, in that case, it sounds like what's happening, Steve, was the staff was treating this project just like any other market rate project.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so it may be that there needs to be reform to separate that out. This is why in California, not only with YIGBY projects, but with certain other affordable housing projects, the state has actually overridden all local zoning and got ministerial approval. That might not get you out of the box on this ministerial approval because but nevertheless, it does streamline the situation.
That's great.
Excellent points. Thank you so much for that example and for your insight, Bill. I wanted to have the panel get to this great question from Deirdre Pfeiffer, who asks she says that she would like to hear more about the conveners for this new push for YIGBY and more diverse sources of affordable housing financing and where that could come from in Arizona. Who would be an ideal convener and who would comprise the ideal coalition that could get this done, and what might the barriers be? I think that's a great question. And since we have a panel of experts, what do you say? Who's the right convener and who are the right people to be at the table?
Well, I would start with the TSMC and Intel and all the folks that are setting up shop and let them see if they're willing to come to the table. And really offset some of, they do provide a valuable service in the jobs and the economic development, but they also have an impact. So see if they'd be willing to come to the table and have them understand the need to keep the housing viable so that they keep their workforce and that they don't suffer from drain. Because what you see anecdotally here in California is that it's become very bimodal, where you don't really have middle class jobs. It's not like say Phoenix, where you still have middle class jobs, or other cities. So I think it's important to educate them on that, as well as the typical electeds and the CDFIs that are active in the geographic region.
Well, I was going to add, I do think we have a good base of support here. I think we need to add to it. And one thing I learned back when I did a lot of lobbying many years ago is nothing happens in Arizona without the League of Cities and Towns support. And this issue, because it involves planning and zoning, we need the support of local government. And so getting the League of Cities and Towns to embrace this and actually become active, they were helpful from the standpoint of staying neutral. But we need them more than just staying neutral. We need them to help actively advocate for this. And so I think getting them on board, getting them to a point where they can support this legislation is going to be critical for us to move forward.
Great point. Thanks, Steve. I wanted to also get to the question. We had a couple of questions in the chat from Becky Mitchell, and Becky asks if there are already architectural plans out there that developers wouldn't have to start from scratch, or maybe affordable faith communities they are looking into high density 60 count apartments or medium density 48 count quadplex. So I don't know. Does anybody on the panel know of existing architectural plans that are out there? And Becky also asks if it's possible to visit St. Catherine Manor. So Steve, I don't know if that's possible or not.
Sure, once we start building it, I'll be more than happy to show you. But I do think, one of the things we do is we use the same architectural firm, namely because they do a great job, but we always learn from the last project. And so when you learn from your projects, you know what works and what doesn't work. And so that's how we tend to approach things. But the other thing too, especially with churches, you sort of have to customize. You can't come in with a cookie cutter model because they're going to throw you out the door. You have to customize it to what they want. And so that's part of the challenge we have.
Yeah, and you're what you come in thinking that you're gonna do is never what you end up with when you're working with the church. I'm working with a church in Austin, and interesting history. It was an African American church that was built at the turn of the century when the church was still segregated, and the congregation basically said, "Hey, the land is worth enough. Can't you just raise the church, put us in a corner, build a new structure with the land because it's large enough and valuable enough where you could essentially pay for church." So, well, yeah, if you want that. And other times you have these quirks where there are idiosyncrasies, some things that are important to the church that you may have overlooked. And in our case, so in Desert Dove, when we were in the design phase, one of the congregation members told us, "Yeah, it's okay if you build over this garden. All we have to do is have a ceremony, and we can move it to this other spot." Lo and behold, we present the site plan to the entire church. We have one of these sweet older leaders comes up and asks, "Are you really going to destroy these memorial gardens?" And we just looked at each other and went back in and redesigned it. So you have to be very mindful of that and understand that also when dealing with churches that sometimes you don't have a unified command, and you have to make sure that you have a clear communication channel with the decision makers and stakeholders.
Yeah, I might just want to underscore that too, every site being different, and also the importance of the process too, of building that support within the faith-based community and also the neighbors around, that actually that back and forth is a productive part of the process.
All excellent points. Thank you. I meant to do this earlier, but Kenny and Bill in particular, I wanted to have you share a little bit more about the entities that you work for, because when I first learned that Bill was with the Center for Housing Policy and Design, I thought that was a very cool name and I needed to learn more. And they do some amazing work. And then Kenny is with the Housing Equity Lab and Arches. So I think these are tremendous resources for people joining this webinar. So I wanted to have each of you have a moment for talking about the work that you do. And I also am going to drop a link to a webinar that we did back in February that talked about the partnering between faith-based communities and developers. So I just want folks, as we kind of wind down and get towards the top of the hour, to have an idea of what the resources are that are out there. So Bill, you're off mute, so I'll go ahead and have you start.
Thanks. The Center for Housing Policy and Design at UC San Diego is housed in the Design Lab. In fact, if you look in the webinar chat, you'll see the director of the Design Lab, Minh Nguyen, who's a housing scholar, giving some resources. Mai and I are the co-directors. The center is a fledgling center, which mostly means we're still raising money. But San Diego is one of the most unaffordable housing markets in the country. We found that two things. Number one, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good things in San Diego, but they weren't really talking to each other, and there wasn't some common sense of what needed to be done. And secondly, there was not a base of knowledge and research that could be, and evidence that could be used. So that is the role the center is designed to play. Our first research report and our first convening was around faith-based land and the potential for housing on the faith-based land. What was important there was not only us bringing out the report, 3,600 acres on 1,300 parcels eligible under SB4 in San Diego County, but also the fact that we got a bunch of developers and a bunch of faith-based leaders in the same room at the same time, which nobody had done before. We're going to try to do something similar now with accessory dwelling units. And our big goal, of course, is to replicate what Kenny does and what Deidre does at Arches, and do a state of housing report for the entire San Diego region. So it's really intending to bring everybody together and give them a base of evidence to work on, so that San Diego, this extremely unaffordable place, can really begin to make progress on this issue.
I love that idea, and I love that you're serving as that convener and hosting those brown bag conversations.
Yes.
Kenny, tell us more about your work, please.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out, Bill. And I have to acknowledge Deirdre Pfeiffer and Daniel Coleman, who are in the audience, are faculty leads for Arches. And I don't see my counterpart, Allison Cook Davis, but she's based at the Morrison Institute at ASU. So our goal really, the Southwest has kind of come up a couple times, has this tradition of affordability, right? We still have the jobs, we're still, seen at this hub people are moving to. And so we want to demonstrate leadership, help build the evidence and research to support informed policymaking, and to partner with our colleagues across the region to do that. And so this is a initiative, that's very close to our minds, and to provide the information, the data that's out there, so it can be put into use. The Housing Equity Lab, the Arches is co-located across the Morrison Institute I mentioned and the Drockman Institute at the U of A. And that's where we do a little bit more of our design-based work, since we are situated in a College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. And so some of these explorations around sites, of tailoring, what and visualizing what's possible in specific locations and neighborhoods. That's something we do very well with our colleagues in the studio-based setting.
And of course, we'll be sure to share all of the links to these resources in our follow-up email. And I don't believe that I mentioned, but we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending out a link to this webinar to everyone who registered for this event today. So I hope that you'll share this with your colleagues and other folks that you think might be interested in learning more about YIGBY policy ideas. I know that we are starting to wind down, and these panelists have such a depth of expertise and knowledge that I want to give everyone a chance to share their last thoughts and any ideas that they would direct the audience to. So Hugh, I am going to go ahead and start with you and have you share any last thoughts or things that you didn't have a chance to mention.
Well, I was going to say two things. First, that with the passage of SB4, it's been a mixed blessing, because we've had folks that have come to faith leaders and have sometimes taken advantage of them. And you have, say, individuals that will maybe are more short-sighted. So for the faith community, it's important that if it doesn't feel right, that you get a second opinion. Because you'd be amazed at how there are some folks out there who have no scruples about taking advantage of churches, whether it's shortchanging them on the appraised value of the land, or sometimes being disingenuous about giving them a subordinated ground lease that still puts the church at risk of foreclosure. So that's the most important thing. And second is that it's important to have open and honest channels of communication. And the challenge with churches, I think, is more that there are so many stakeholders that you sort of have to establish rapport with the key stakeholders and really understand the concerns very well to really have a project that makes everyone happy. So being honest about expectations and having that clear communication is very important.
Thanks, Hugh. That's a really important point, a sobering thought, but I think an important thing for people to consider moving forward. Kenny, last thoughts.
Yeah, just actually maybe I'll drop a citation. Just the ways that faith-based organizations are going to develop housing is going to be different, right? And I think the real opportunity or optimism that I have is these are trusted institutions too, and that are reconnecting people, meeting needs within our really close-knit communities, and so just to support that, right? To understand that the flexibility is needed there. And, they're thinking about affordability deeply, thinking about providing services and connecting and often situated in high opportunity areas within neighborhoods. And so this is, it's a win-win for so many people and in so many different ways.
I love the optimism and I share it thanks to this great conversation and these panelists. So thank you for that, Kenny. Bill, final thoughts.
Well, I would go back, building on what you said, I would go back to the point that the faith-based institution, the church, has to trust the developer, and that has to be a relationship that's straight up and nobody's taking advantage of it, anybody. The other thing I would say, and I think Steve has sort of alluded to this, is that the church or other faith-based institution really has to decide this is what they want to do. Not only is this mission aligned, but this is the thing they really want to do, as opposed to we need money, so we're going to sell the land, which is perfectly fine if that's your priority. But if you're going to do this, you got to be all in doing it, and you can't have any regrets. And this has to be the thing you've decided is mission driven and that you want to do, and that aligns not only with your mission, but with the faith-based institutions, I guess you might say, business plan.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I think we appeal to everybody out there, and by and large, everybody does this, is we really have to educate decision makers. We live in an age of misinformation. Nobody knows what to believe. And how I got the churches engaged with us is we took them to our projects. They see them firsthand. They're like, oh, okay. All right, we'll do it. But we almost have to get people to see these projects and talk to them about what we do, including legislators. I've had groups of legislators come through our properties and they become believers. But we need more of that. And we need more people educating our decision makers. And if you could do that, help us.
Thanks, Steve. I hope that everyone joining us either live or listening to this on a recording will join us in this YIGBY movement. And I just really appreciate everyone being here today and contributing to this conversation. And I appreciate the audience for asking great questions, contributing to the chat. We will be sending out a link to this recording as well as the links to the many resources that were shared in the chat to everyone who registered for this webinar today. I wanted to end by saying thank you to ARCHES, the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability, for co-sponsoring this with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities. And most importantly, I wanted to thank our 4 amazing panelists for their time and for sharing their thoughts. And I just really appreciate the audience for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you all again on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.